Thank you for listening to the Matt's Movie Reviews podcast, available on Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, and Stitcher. Also, please follow Matt's Movie Reviews on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, Reddit, Instagram, and MeWe. And of course, be sure to visit mattsmoviereviews.net for the latest reviews, top 10 lists, and more. Now, on to the show.
This box, Edgar. It's not what you think it is. It was built to contain something not of this world. By opening the box, I have released it.
Release what?
A demon. A demon must continue to get what it wants. It has the power to rid me of my illness.
I'm not sure I can do this.
6 sacrifices. And I will live. You won't let me down, will you, Edgar?
We're gonna finish this. Together.
Hello and welcome to the Matt's Movie Reviews podcast. I am your host, Matthew Pejkovic, and this is episode number 402. Out now on digital and video on demand is The Jack in the Box Awakening, a horror thriller that tells the story of a dying heiress who acquires an ancient Jack in the Box that contains a demon clown who must feast on 6 victims in order to cure the heiress of her illness. Featuring a frightening central monster and great use of location, The Jack in the Box Awakening is the latest film from writer and director Lawrence Fowler. And Lawrence, I'm glad to say that you're joining me today on the podcast. I thank you so very much for your time.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So for people who don't know, Jack in the Box Awakening is the sequel to Jack in the Box, which I think came out in 2020, maybe 2021 in some territories. Creating this sequel, did you always have an idea for a continuation of this Jack in the Box story? Is that something that you always had on the back burner just in case that first film did have the success that it ended up having?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when we first sort of wrote and created the character and saw it brought to life so incredibly by Robert Nairn in the first film, we thought the character had something, and we wanted to investigate the lore of the legend of the demon, where it came from, why it's here, what it's trying to achieve, all these things. I think as soon as we finished the first film, we were very, very keen to keep developing ideas for a sequel. And I think something I really was keen to with this one as well was to make a film that if people hadn't seen the first film, they weren't too lost. It was a case of if you hadn't seen the original film, this, you hadn't had to have seen it before seeing this one. So, no, of course, it was great fun to work on the first one. As you say, it did come out, almost a couple of years ago now, but even today, it's just got a release in cinemas in Mexico. So it just continues to go. So, no, it's all very good.
You mentioned before about how this film kind of delves into the history of the Jack monster character. So in certain way, it's a kind of a prequel. There's kind of like flashbacks and stuff. I've talked to some filmmakers and in regards to that context of film. They talk about how they might have backstories for their characters. They might have notes. They might have diaries. Do you keep things like that for your character of Jack? Do you have kind of like a whole backstory that you kind of can pick on and now always kind of developing, always kind of like this, always kind of like working on the evolution of who this Jack character is?
Absolutely, yeah. We keep all sorts of notes and ideas in books, and just every time a new idea comes to us, it's good to keep a record of so you don't forget them, of course. But a lot of the backstory comes from ideas and beliefs of reality. Things like the idea, the true origin of the Jack in the Box is argued, and some think it started from a legend of a demon trapped in an old boot. Others think it started a bit more innocently in just children's toys and things like that. So it's kind of been interesting to kind of fuse a few of these different ideas together and come up with something that we thought was a bit fresh and original to the creepy clown subgenre. And it's been real fun to come up with crazy different ideas of where Jack came from and what his purpose is.
So I was listening to an interview that you gave recently, and you talked about how it wasn't necessarily a horror movie to kind of inspire you to become a filmmaker. It was the film The Dark Knight, the Christopher Nolan Batman film, which I think came out 2008 or something. Now, that film isn't a horror movie, but it does feature a clown in the Joker, of course. What is it about you? Do you think it is about that kind of figure, the clown, that really kind of, I don't know, just gives people a certain amount of dread? Because the intention of the clown is the exact opposite, right? I mean, it's there for entertainment, it's there for the silliness and slapstick, but it certainly has over the last few years, I think, kind of grown especially in a horror genre to be like this kind of macabre figure. Where do you think that fear comes from? I mean, do you share that kind of fear? Do you have your own kind of phobias in regards to clowns? Because I must confess that I have a little bit of it myself.
Oh, really? Oh, wow. Yes. I don't personally. I have a few phobias of flying and things like that. So not short of a few phobias, but in terms of clowns, I think, I don't know. I guess it's just the idea that, clowns are, the idea of clowns, obviously they look, human form, human, smiles, very exaggerated expressions. And I guess it's the same sort of thing. It comes with, ideas of what's creepy about dolls as well. It's almost life, but not quite. There's just something about them that's just not quite right. And I guess perhaps it's the fake smile, the whole thing. And along with, obviously, like you said, things like the Joker and all these other sort of incarnations of clowns that are anything but good. I guess it all kind of works together to make a bit of a phobia for people. But I guess that's a question back for you. I mean, what is it about clowns that trigger a phobia for you?
Well, there's two things. So number one, there's kind of like a false facade in regards to the clown. So the makeup is slapped on the face and you have the smiley face that kind of presents kind of like a pleasing kind of character or a silly character. But behind the makeup, you don't really know what's there. And what really kind of brought that home to me, I don't know if you've ever heard of the American serial killer, John Wayne Gacy. So, of course, in his spare time, in his community, he was like a pillar of his community and used to dress up like a clown to entertain the kids. And that really kind of brought home the kind of the masked identity, duality, good and evil, or the facade of good to cover the evil that I think some people have in regards to clowns. And what's interesting about your clown, though, in Jack, is that he is clearly a kind of a supernatural character, but there is a human kind of element in behind it all, as shown in kind of the prequel elements. Do you foresee maybe a film in the future? Because this is the second film in the franchise, and I imagine this film is just going to be successful, if not more, as the first. Do you foresee kind of delving into more of that human element of the clown in the future, maybe kind of a prequel movie?
Absolutely. The very first draft of this script was almost entirely prequel based. It's something that over time kind of moved away a little bit and became more of a classic kind of sequel. But it's something I'd love to do. I'd love to kind of go back in time, see, because I don't want to give too much away from the story. But in the Jack in the Box Awakening, we show how a clown, from 200 years ago, is tortured with this kind of curse, this that begins with kind of in the mind, it kind of festers and it slowly takes over the body. And I'd love to go back and show this character going through this, this transformation and see, more of his story. I think that would be really, really good. There's often a demand from distributors and things like that to kind of move the story forwards, often rather than backwards. So it's obviously something we would love to do, but we'd have to see kind of what the demand for the story would be. But I think one of those things is from the first film, we would, you release a character like Jack into the world, and you kind of wonder if he's a demon, why does he got such kind of human type features? So I was very keen to kind of explain the human backstory of him and why he takes the certain form that he does.
The thing that's really successful about the Jack in your films is that it's not only the look, we've talked about the facade, but it's also the movement and the sound of the character as well. James Swanton plays Jack in Jack in the Box Awakening. When it comes to kind of like the movement of the character and the sound of the character, I don't know why, but I kind of get a think about the raptors from like Jurassic Park. It's kind of like a praying, kind of like stalking, but like almost like a hunched, jerking kind of thing to it as well. Was that an inspiration in regards to how you wanted your clown figure to present itself on screen as kind of like this stalking, praying, almost kind of like primal creature?
Yeah, very, very primal. I mean, not so much a dinosaur as kind of like as a reference point, but funny enough, in terms of the sound, let's say 50% of the sounds are James Swanton himself, who did a fantastic job in the part, of course. And the other 50% are kind of modified dinosaur raptor-y type sounds, which Fred Pearson, our amazing sound designer, used modified to kind of fit the size of Jack's frame as opposed to a giant dinosaur. So it's a combination of the two. Maybe that's kind of where you're getting your kind of inclination of a dinosaur type thing from. But my conversations with James were focused around the idea of a human being stuck in there somewhere. Almost like this kind of broken kind of skeleton, this walking skeleton within this demonic, look. And we were very much focused on, in terms of the movements of it being half creature, half man. And I hope that comes across. And I guess that, would be quite similar to what you're saying. But James has got a fantastic way of moving. I've never seen anyone quite like it. And when we put out the casting call, his self-tape of his movements was just unbelievable. And I've never, like I said, seen anyone be able to move quite the same way he does.
It kind of reminds me as well as what Vincent D'Onofrio did with his character in Men in Black, where it's kind of like a creature within kind of like a skin suit. Like the jerky movements aren't really kind of anatomically correct in regards to what a human being is, or even though it does move kind of forward. It's very interesting to watch, and I think that's part and parcel of what makes the character so effective, is just watching that kind of that walk and that gauge and everything else in there as well. The Matt's Movie Reviews podcast is brought to you by 80s Tees. 80s Tees is an online retailer of licensed t-shirts and pop culture gear from your favorite movies, TV shows, cartoons, video games, comic books, and musicians. Celebrate your inner 80s nerd and click on the link in the show notes below to get the raddest retro t-shirts delivered to your door. The Matt's Movie Reviews podcast is brought to you by Loot Crate. Founded in 2012, Loot Crate is the worldwide leader in fan subscription boxes. Loot Crate partners with industry leaders in entertainment, gaming, sports, and pop culture to deliver monthly themed crates, produce interactive experiences in digital content, and film original video productions. No matter what you geek out about, Loot Crate has a subscription box for you. To get your very own exclusive collectibles, apparel, and gear delivered to your door, be sure to click on the link in the show notes below. In regards to the film's location, I've read that this was filmed in a couple of different places. But what about that central manor itself? Was that Northampton where that was filmed?
Yeah, both were in Northampton, which is my hometown here in England. And the reason we filmed across two different ones is because the story calls for a really grand set of gates, and our main interior location just didn't have the long driveway. I didn't have the gates trapping them all in, which is why we filmed across two. But our main location was this incredible manor lost in the countryside of Northampton. And it's always nice when the main location is a 20-minute drive from your house. It's a nice little thing.
And what about the manor itself? Is that empty? Is someone living there? Do you have to kind of get permission? Because it's pretty much almost kind of like a playground from which Jack kind of like disposes of his victims.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult because we've done a number of films, and every time you go to a location like this, that has very expensive, furniture within. You've got to be very, very careful. We filmed in museums, we filmed in all sorts of things, but this was actually someone's house. So, you have to be very respectful. You have to be very understanding that they want to go to bed at some point. So when you sort of film into the 1-2 o'clock in the mornings, that it can be a little bit more tricky than if you've negotiated kind of an arrangement with a location where people aren't staying there for the night. So it brings its own set of challenges, but as a location, it was absolutely fantastic and it was perfect for the film. And you've just got to kind of adapt your way of working around the setting. If it's somewhere that, like I said, a museum, it does seem to cause a lot less stress than if you're having to, remember that this is someone's home and to keep the noise down at certain points and things like that.
Any temptation whatsoever to get James to dress like the Jack and scare the tenants in the house?
Oh, absolutely. I'll never forget the owners, because obviously you describe what you're doing, but until you come down those stairs and you see James in his full get up, you don't quite know what we're doing. And his face, he rents it out, you see, to people on Airbnb and things like that. So I remember him saying, this is the strangest ever hire out we've ever done in our lives. And that's not surprising.
Speaking about the get up, how long does it take for James to kind of like get that face on and the costume and everything? Is it because the great thing about the movie is that practical effects is very much what it's about in this film. And I love, I'm a big fan of talking about practical effects and watching practical effects on screen. I imagine it takes some time though to get the clown face on him.
Do you know what? Believe it or not, it really doesn't. Isabella Lata, who created the mask, did an incredible job. We discussed many different ways of doing it, whether it was a case of pieces, or she came up with an approach that was essentially just a one solid piece mask. And the amazing thing about that is the application time is so quick, aside from kind of minor touches up here and there around the eyes and the teeth and things like that. And it's not an 8 hours in the chair job, nothing like that. Jack is ready to go within an hour, which is just, as a filmmaker, is a blessing, because it must be agony for James, who does a lot of kind of creature work, to be sitting in chairs for many hours. And do you know what? People forget that after a long day of filming, people get to go home, and we can go home, but someone like James has to sit there in a chair and get it all taken off him. Bless him. So no, I'm pleased to say on this one, it was actually pretty quick. And again, the costume was fairly simple too, kind of a one piece, and the claws were stitched together to make a fairly easily slip on glove. So I'd like to think, as creature costumes go, it was one of the easier ones that James will ever encounter.
I have a theory that this year, or hopefully praying at least, that Halloween is going to come back in a big way, because the hope is, of course, that, all the stuff with the pandemic dies down by the time October rolls around. Are you prepared for a number of the Jack costumes to be seen out there? As by that time, you'll have had 2 movies out, and would have been in a lot of markets, and people, clearly like the film and like the character.
I'm braced. I'm ready. I'd love to see it. I mean, I get pictures sometimes, and I get a lot of fan art and stuff like that, but to see one at my door would be amazing. It would be absolutely fantastic. And I can give notes on how accurate it is. That would be amazing.
That would be amazing. So final question here. I also read that your next film is going to be a ghost story called The Ghost Within. What can you share about that so far? It's a bit silly of me to say, because we were kind of keeping it a little bit under wraps, and I went and mentioned it in the podcast. So probably a bit silly, but it's quite early stages. We're going to film. It's a film, I'd say, in the same vein as things like Woman in Black, The Others, classic kind of English ghost story set in the countryside. And it's about a woman that goes back to a home that her father was arrested for 30 years ago for the murder of her sister, but she's never quite bought the story that he did it himself. So she goes back there, uncovers some secrets, and the ghost of her sister comes back to unveil some dark secrets. So it should be a fun one, and we're really looking forward to filming it in the spring. Well, I can't wait to see it, and hopefully when it comes out, Lawrence, you and I can talk again. Until then, everyone out there listening listening, the Jack in the Box Awakening, available now on digital and video and demand. Please do check it out if you like your creepy clown films in the vein of It and other movies as well. I really recommend that you check out the Jack in the Box Awakening. And Lawrence Fowler, congratulations with the success of your 2 films now. And I can't wait to see what you do in the future with The Ghost Within, and hopefully we can talk again when that comes out.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Matt. It's been great talking to you.
Thank you for watching the Matt's Movie Reviews channel. Please subscribe for more reviews, podcast interviews, and exclusive content. Also, if you would like to request a review and support my work, please join my Patreon via the link in the description below.